Very welcome back to the Pink and Channels. It is a preview show here ahead of Norwich City's FA Cup trip to Elland Road on Sunday afternoon. Really looking forward to that, but there's plenty to discuss in sort of the next 45 minutes or so. Delighted to be joined by my colleague Paddy Davitt for your preview show. Of course, we want your comments, your questions, your predictions. Get them all down below and we'll work through those as we move through the show. Paddy, Norwich 4 wins away from Wembley. Leeds is, of course, the next step. I suppose, how are you feeling heading into this game?
Very well, Adam. Nice to see you, mate. Nice to see everybody. Hopefully you can hear us. I'm down in the dungeon, so the connection is never the strongest. But I'm quite looking forward to this one now. Yeah, another element thrown in the last hour or two, hasn't there, with Daniel Farke's red card being upheld or him accepting the charge. So, yep, as Raymond's just tweeted or just posted in there. Yeah, he is in the stands for this game. I've sort of checked the Norwich end. I think he should be able still to do his pre-match, which is scheduled to be this afternoon. So keep an eye on the Pink and Channels, anything. Because I remember, going off a slight tangent, but he was very reticent. I always was told at Norwich not to be doing the media. He wasn't one of these coaches who sometimes sends their assistant in to do the media. I was watching something with Ange Postecoglou the other day, and he was talking about, it was 130 press conferences he did last season, and it becomes quite wearisome. But I think Farke always quite liked that environment, and was loath. So I was told during the Norwich period to not allow anybody else to come and do those media. So I'm pretty sure that will be the same for Leeds. So I'd expect we'll hear from him this afternoon, whether he'll just sort of knock the FA element on the head as he give it a 12-minute monologue pre-midweek game against Sunderland. I'd imagine he'd be probably thinking, well, that's done now. But it will be good to hear his thoughts on yet another reunion. And he's quite enjoyed his reunions with Norwich, hasn't he, thus far? I don't think he's lost a game yet. Norwich's record at Elland Road is pretty ropey. The last, I think it's 8 meetings, they've only won the one game, and that was with Farke in charge, that memorable game in the 18-19 title-winning season, the Vrantich free kick, and how good were Norwich that night? They were brilliant, in fact, and they'll need to be every bit as good going into Sunday's game for obvious reasons, given it's a Premier League team at a Premier League ground with the vast majority of those fans, home fans. So not an easy task, but one you feel now Norwich will, under this head coach, Philippe Clement, will approach with real relish, and we'll obviously hear from him tomorrow just to clarify that straight away. Normally he's a match day -1 in terms of his pre-match. So I think it's going to be, where are we now? Yeah, just about this time tomorrow, we'll be down at Colney and we'll hear from him. And I would imagine his tone will be very much front foot. Let's go and see what we can do against this club. Okay, everybody outside the bubble will probably expect Leeds to go through. That's natural. But I get the sense he fancies it. I get the sense those players fancy it. And if you're a Norwich fan, go there and relish it and try and cause an upset, albeit a small scale upset for me. We're not talking Macclesfield toppling Palace or even Port Vale turning over Bristol City midweek. I wouldn't be shocked if Norwich go there and get a result. But equally, we know how difficult they've found it in recent times to go to Elland Road and get anything. So I think you're under no illusions. It's going to need Norwich probably at their best under Clement so far, and there's some good high bars already been hit, but I think they'll have to go above and beyond that, because I saw a little bit of Leeds midweek, and I know they lost that game to Sunderland, but they have some very good players, and it's very different Farke sort of template for me to what we're associated with the Norwich era, particularly in the good times at Norwich, where it was very much they would almost just wait and try and retain possession and try and manoeuvre players or teams around, and then you'd have like magicians like Buendia and strikers like Pukki to really, press home that weight of possession. I haven't seen too much of Leeds under Farke, but that midweek was I thought it was very Jurgen Klopp, heavy metal, crash bang football. Everything was very high intensity. He was getting the ball into the final third as quick as possible and just try and sort of overwhelm Sunderland. And to be fair to Sunderland, they dug in and they got the result. And I feel Norwich will have to be that way inclined as well. I think they're going to come under a lot of pressure. Leeds will try and put this tie to bed as early as they can. So can Norwich withstand the inevitable periods where their backs will be against the wall? And we've seen a lot of evidence now under Clement that that type of adversity, they can weather it, they can come out the other side, and they can then cause problems at the other end of the pitch. So fascinating game in store, mate. Yeah, but long-winded way of saying I'm very much looking forward to Sunday 4:30. What about you, AH?
Yeah, I can't wait for it. I think, it's one of them with this game would have been 3 months ago. We'd have all been fearing the worst and maybe what the scoreline would have looked like. But we can all sort of travel there, I think, with a belief, and Clement certainly believes, as you said, it's sort of mentioned it in the post-match press conference the other day about Norwich can go and beat anybody in the world on their day, which, is certainly not a statement we would have associated with this group of players sort of, early September, October time, given they were off the back of that sort of winless run at Carrow Road under Liam Manning. And the feeling was definitely League One football rather than going to a Premier League side and sort of competing with them. So it's been a stark contrast. And you mentioned sort of that belief that Clement will have instilled within this group over the course of this week. I guess given sort of Norwich's position now in the Championship table with 9 wins in 11 in all competitions and 11-point buffer now to the relegation zone, does it almost unlock a little bit more freedom, I guess, to go to Elland Road and sort of express themselves with probably league sort of status a little bit more safe and secure in the Championship?
Yeah, I think that's fair comment. I was walking into the office today and I was trying to second guess, as we do, where Clement's going to go in terms of his selection policy. I mean, you look at the West Brom, you look at the Walsall games, and he did make quite a number of changes. I can't think off the top of my head, but it felt like 7 or 8 maybe in both of those games. And he gave, if you want to call them that, the shadow men, the fringe players, opportunities. But that's home games against Walsall and West Brom. This is an away game in the 5th round of the FA Cup against Leeds. So does he try within the confines of how many injuries they're still wading through? And I know there's been some positive footage the club have put out in the last 24, 48 hours about Pelle Matson out running at Colney and likewise Oscar Schwartau, but neither of those are in the mix for this weekend. That's still a bit premature. So is it just the group of players he had maybe going into the Leicester game, added maybe a Mankel Forson to that? And if that is the case, does he look at defensively? Does he say, okay, we'll go Kovacevic instead of Dan Grimshaw for these 2 games in previous games in the competition? Do you retain Kellen Fisher and Ben Krasene, or do you maybe take one of those out of the equation and maybe, Fisher's versatility allows you to play Stacey? And then central defensively, McConville has been an absolute shoe-in, so I don't expect him to come out of the team, but do you put Darling in instead of Cordoba? It's going to be quite intriguing where Philippe Clement feels he's got to go with this in terms of his selection. Because for me, I think it needs to probably tip a bit more towards, what he would go with if it was a Championship game this weekend. Because I think, because it is away Leeds, Premier League, and all that entails, I personally would feel that it probably is improving Norwich's chances to go with that back 5 that have more often than not in the Championship in this recent period have got those results, have dealt with whatever they've faced on the road or at Carrow Road. Likewise, I think you've got to go Midfield and McLean. You need that, I think, ballast and that experience in the centre of the park. And I suppose top end of the pitch, it almost does pick itself, really. It's got to be Chris Gordon for me and Ali Ahmed on the left. Maybe there's a debate to be had on the right-hand side, because do you want to shoehorn Bahoma and Slimane into your starting 11? I'm not sure. I think seems to be trusting Liam Gibbs. So for me, it's probably going to be Gibbs, Ahmed, and then I think he'll start with Mahoma, because I just think, given they're building him up, it makes more sense for me to go from the get-go, get an hour out of him, then get him off. And as we saw at Leicester, hopefully with the same outcome, you get Slimani on and there's no drop in terms of the creativity element in that number 10 position. So, yeah, I mean, again, I'll throw this one back to you, AH. I mean, do you think, that's an interesting one. Fisher, Darling, McConville, Stacey. Yeah, I could see that kind of slight tweak, but still retaining a bit more of the Championship sort of setup. But how do you think he'll go, particularly defensively, AH?
Yeah, I was actually sort of doing a little bit of digging before we came on. I think Jack Stacey has only played 1 Championship game since that win over QPR in sort of the back end of November. Both of his other starts have come in the FA Cup, so that sort of maybe is an intriguing element. Jacob Wright is another one who, of course, hasn't sort of played a huge amount in sort of the new year. Played quite a bit sort of in the back end of 2025, but again had opportunities to play in the FA Cup. Does Clement go with him, or does he look for that sort of more experienced duo infield and Kenny, who they need to obviously protect with Maatsen still yet to come back to fitness. So that's obviously interesting. I think that number 10 role is the one that really intrigues me. You look at sort of the form of both Magoma and Slimani. It was Slimani in round 3 that really sort of propelled himself back into the Norwich City fold with those couple of assists against Walsall. And the form from there on has been, magnificent. The amount of goals he's got, I think it's 5 now in the Championship, 1 assist, and backed up with a couple of assists against West Brom as well in the last round at Carrow Road. So there's an interesting dynamic there. Magoma is, of course, is sort of the star of the moment as well. The fans are buying into what he's showing on the pitch. So that really is intriguing. Obviously, the winger areas is where they maybe lack options, and feels like sort of Ahmed and Gibbs are sort of the only real natural sort of options in terms of what they have. Gibbs obviously not a winger, but in terms of what he gives in energy and sort of, just effort, I guess, down that side of the pitch is something I think to consider. But I wouldn't want to disrupt it too much. I think the flow of what they had at Leicester and the confidence of that group, I'd almost want to try and retain that, I think, going to Elland Road and sort of really giving Leeds a go and giving them a game, because I think there's obviously the element of Farke and not being able to be on the touchline. And I sort of looked at some of their squads that they've fielded so far in the FA Cup, and clearly they've got a lot stronger squad than Norwich have in terms of depth and finances and sort of the value of some of these players. I think Okafor, they signed for 18 million. His starts have mainly come in the FA Cup. Longstaff, I think they signed for 12 million. He's sort of been limited to FA Cup appearances as well. So Farke's got options. I guess what sort of team would maybe you expect him to field for Leeds? Because Norwich fans will know from his time here, he often did look to try and sort of rotate a little bit and give some fringe players opportunities, and clearly they've got players to do that.
They certainly have. And that takes me to what Philippe said, I think it was pre-Leicester, where you look at most Premier League squads and it's 2 quality options for every position, by and large. Okay, setting aside injuries and what have you, but you referenced there, that's a lot of dough to be tied up in players who haven't really played a huge amount of minutes in the Premier League, and it just underlines the gulf financially. We know it's there. We've seen it, both sides of it, in terms of Norwich, memorably under Farke, and not so memorably in terms of when they got there, how uncompetitive they were. And for me, I think that will be dictated by what is the approach, what is the mindset for Farke with his coaching staff. Is it Premier League survival is the be all and end all? And I was a bit surprised. I looked at the league table this morning off the back of the Palace Tottenham game Thursday night, and by no manner of means are they out of that now. I think there's only a 2.3 point buffer between sort of West Ham and Forest, I think, and then Leeds. Obviously, it looks like maybe Burnley and Wolves are gone, but for me, they're still firmly in the mix to try and avoid going down. And if that is the case, they've got some big games coming up. They've lost, obviously, a big game at home to Sunderland in midweek. Does that allow or maybe convince Farke to maybe go with those players he's used in previous FA Cup ties rather than, go with his frontline options? Bit like Clement, I think there'll be a mix and match, really. I think that is the case in terms of Premier League is the be-all and end-all. But equally, they get past Norwich, which most outside the Norwich but wouldn't expect them to do. Then you're into a quarter-final. You get a favourable draw there. You're 1 game from Wembley. And, a club with the scale of Leeds and certainly expectation of their fan base, they would dearly love, I'm sure, to go deep in this competition and ideally go all the way. So, and I remember, we all remember, Farke as a Norwich manager, he treated Cups with huge respect. I remember the sides he selected when they went to Arsenal. I think that was the League Cup, and obviously Tottenham, memorably, when they won that penalty shootout. And that was Farke, wasn't it? Or I might have got that one wrong. It was Farke era, wasn't it? Yeah, but irrespective, he always spoke about he wouldn't disrespect the cup competitions, and I don't think he ever did in terms of Norwich manager. So, maybe that leads us to think it will be, their bigger players, their biggest hitters. Calvert-Lewin maybe leading the line, maybe. Ethan Ampadu, he seems to me to be almost the kingmaker in that Leeds setup, and you'd expect him to play. And Aronson, I like the look of him. I think he's got something about him in terms of that creativity. So yeah, I think as I've gone through this answer, I'm coming to the conclusion sadly for Norwich, I think they probably will go quite strong, because if it went the other way and maybe he puts some of the lesser lights in and it doesn't go for them, I've even seen it off the back of midweek, fans again questioning Farke, questioning if he's the right person for that rather huge job he's got there at Elland Road. And if you lose a home FA Cup tie to a lower league team, I'm sure that would subject him to even more scrutiny and criticism, maybe in certain quarters. So, yeah, I think it's probably safe to assume Leeds will be pretty strong come Sunday. Yeah.
Yeah, do you think his touchline ban, as we mentioned at the start, is going to have too much influence, I guess, on sort of the overall result? He spoke sort of in his press conference, I think it was Monday before that game against Sunderland, about how he's never picked up a red card previously. I think he had a couple of or suspension at Sheffield United last season for Leeds off the back of a couple of different issues, but never actually physically been given a red card. And I think we know, he's obviously an emotional manager, but he's always sort of managed to sort of rein that in and have it under control. So I guess were you a little bit surprised to see that red card brandished?
Yeah, I was actually. Yeah, I mean, I've not followed it with any great depth, but I saw a sort of flavour of his pre-Sunderland press conference where he opened up and went into one of his famous monologues, and he was adamant there'd been no abusive language or anything like that directed towards the referee or his officials. And I guess if that was the case, then it was maybe more that aggressive perception as he ran onto the pitch. But for me, we see that very often with manager, head coaches at full-time whistle going to maybe plead their case or seek clarification with the officials. Not saying it's right or wrong, but that's not an unusual occurrence. So why that has been deemed a red card seems a bit strange, a bit inconsistent, because we'll see it again, I'm sure, this weekend, no doubt, and subsequent games. And the upshot is, he, as he said, with his tongue in his cheek, that'll be the last time he runs on the pitch, because maybe it's his gait or his manner that has got him sanctioned. But I think, given some of the offences that probably do merit red cards, I think that was probably, it feels quite harsh, and he certainly felt it was, no doubt about it. And but it's an interesting one that they haven't obviously decided to appeal it. He's accepted the charge, and I think that's probably driven by, and we've seen it last season with Kenny McLean and one or two others, that you appeal, you lose the appeal. I think there is a facility for that disciplinary panel to almost impose an extra sanction. And of course, if he goes down that route and it goes against them, then he could be missing for 2 Premier League games, for example. So, given what we said previously, the situation they find themselves in, they've obviously weighted it that, no, we can't take that risk from the Leeds point of view, and lose Farke for any length of time in terms of Premier League. So, but it'll be an interesting one in terms of the dynamic. We know his right-hand man, Eddie Reamer from Norwich days, doesn't strike me as a similar type of character. So it has to have a disruptive impact. There's no doubt about it. As much as Farke can set out the game plan, the template, the personnel they select, but those in-game changes, and you imagine, again, I don't know whether the legalities of it, but whether there'll be communications between people sat next to Farke and the dugout, you'd imagine that would be the case, whether that's technically allowed to be done or not. But messages, I'm sure, will be able to be passed through. But it must be a disruptive element if you're one of those Leeds players. And we you see Farke, he is always front of house. He's always prowling the touchline. He's not one of these who will go and sit down for any length of time. More often than not, he's out there. And not to have him there has to be a little bit of a disorientating feel, I would imagine, from a Leeds point of view. But we'll see. We can only really judge how big a factor that is once the dust settles on Sunday evening. But it doesn't. I don't think it helps their build-up to have all that. And as I say, it'll be interesting if Farke does his media in an hour or two, if he opens up again and goes for the FA again, and the people who've made that decision, because that's all for me unwanted noise, taking away from what the focus should be on this weekend for them, is trying to get the better of Norwich. But I guess from a Norwich perspective, you're looking at any little strands you can clutch to maybe tip the odds ever so slightly back in Norwich's favour, and that could turn out to be the case, that the guy who is their leader effectively isn't going to be present, and as such, that has to have a negative impact in certain aspects of, certainly on the match day cycle. If he's not in the dressing room pre-match, not in the dressing room half-time, not able to do anything during the game directly front of house, then you would feel that has to maybe work in Norwich's favour.
Yeah, talking of leaders, one player who obviously worked underneath Daniel Farke at his time at Norwich City and could be set to reach a big milestone this weekend is Kenny McLean. It will be game 300 should he, appear at Elland Road on Sunday afternoon. I think Connor was down at Carrow Road early this week having a good chat with City's captain, and that will be available across our channels early next week. Definitely worth tuning into that. But before that, sort of, Paddy, what sort of impact, I guess, has he had as a Norwich City player, over the course of his, 8 years now with the club, a player who has sort of featured under every single manager. There's been plenty of those in his time at the football club and always given 100%. I think clearly a key influence, that leadership he's now demonstrated over sort of the last few years since taking on that captaincy role from Grant Hanley. How good a moment, I guess, will it be on Sunday for him to reach game 300?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's a cracking milestone in the modern game as well. The longevity that you need to get anywhere close to those type of milestones is rare, and it's increasingly rare now. And there's been at times, a suggestion that he could have moved on, or that there was certainly interest from other clubs. I mean, when he signed his previous deal, there was I think there was clearly routes that he could have taken to go out the club. But what struck me about that period is how passionate he was and how passionate he spoke about, no, I want to be at this club. This is where I feel connected. This is where my family feel connected in terms of the area more broadly. And he wanted to stay. And that was very refreshing to hear, because naturally you feel maybe as a player you get to a point, I don't know, 5 years in, 6 years in, that you maybe think, well, okay, maybe I would like to look over the fence and see what's out there. And, I think Leeds were linked. I think he's, a club he has supported and was at briefly in his youth. Rangers, they were linked. And no, none of those seemed to float his boat. It was Norwich, and he wanted to remain at Norwich. And I think, as much as there's been ups and too many downs maybe in recent seasons, he has been a constant, a reassuring presence. And I think right now, and maybe again it's another hat tip to Philippe Clement, that he's playing some excellent football at the moment. I thought he was, in the last 2 or 3 games, he's been very influential. And that's great to see, because inevitably, and, he would understand, you get to a certain age as he is in his career, questions get asked about, are you no longer the player you were, or are you having to tailor your game and maybe not that driving influence? There's no sign of that whatsoever. So, as that point says there, he is the complete professional. And it's more interesting for me now is, yes, this 300 milestone, but clearly we know there's the option beyond the end of this current deal in the summer, and I'll be absolutely flabbergasted if that isn't a situation that ensures that Kenny McLean is still leading this group into next season, and maybe, who knows, maybe even longer than that. But yeah, I mean, all you have to say, I think, and it is a bit of a cliche, but I am pretty sure when Philippe Clement sits to have his selection meetings, he is the first name on the team sheet. If he's fit and he's available, he's the first name on the team sheet. And it was interesting and it's relevant because it was the FA Cup. In the last round, he did give him a breather. Rory McConville took the armband. That was a good signal for him in terms of his progression and strides that he's making. But when I just said to Philippe post-match about, wasn't that is that a signal of the trust you place in Rory to give him the armband? And before I got the words out, Kenny is our captain. That was more or less the message. Kenny is the captain, which we know he is the captain. But I think that it cuts to the heart of where his status is within the dressing room, within this management team as well. But he is such an important figure on and off the pitch. And he will continue to be, because obviously we can see it. Philippe talks often. This is, by some measure, the youngest average age group squad in the Championship. And if that is the case, then okay, they may address that in windows to come and get a few more, not older, but certainly mid to older players in terms of profile. But if that is the case, this process, you're going to need your Kenny McLeans. You're going to need those type of players in and around it, solid, reliable, know what you get every training session, every match. leadership, and that's for me why I think this story. There's a few more chapters to run. Not simply 300, and we're in the end game. No, I don't get any sense that we're in the end game with Kenny McLean. I think he is going to be around Norwich for a considerable amount of time yet.
Speaking of longevity, of course, today maybe just steering away from the game very shortly. This morning we had confirmation that Neil Adams, will be stepping away from his role as technical director at the football club. Someone who, of course, has been in a multitude of different positions throughout his time at the football club, from player to youth academy coach to assistant sporting director. He's been all over the place within the Carrow walls. How sort of big a moment, I guess, is that within sort of the recruitment for heading into the summer? I think the expectation is that Lee Dunwall will step up to become technical director, and Norwich will look to recruit, whether that's internally or externally, for a new head of recruitment. But it feels quite a big sort of story, I guess, around the football club heading into what feels like quite a big summer of recruitment.
Yes, to a degree, but what I would make quite clear, and speaking to people earlier today, there's real continuity there, because it's going to be, it will be confirmed in due course, but it's going to be Lee Dunn stepping in there. And Lee Dunn has been at the club since 2013, and since 2021, he has been, as his title says, head of recruitment. So purely viewed through going into a transfer window, targeting players, that whole aspect, I don't see any change at all, because the two key drivers are going to be still there, Ben Napper and Lee Dunn, and they're just going to work even closer together, if anything. So I think it's more holistically, in terms of what it will change, because it's those other areas, maybe outside of recruitment, that Neil Adams would have been across in his technical director role. And of course, the next strand to this is almost, if Lee Dunn pops up or moves up, to that assistant sporting director role, then there's a vacancy there in terms of head of recruitment. So, and I think again, latest soundings are that they're still working through that process. Does that necessarily mean an external appointment, or do you go internal? And I think they've shown quite often now in recent times that they're not afraid to go internal if they believe there's candidates there who, like Lee Dunn, have shown themselves very capable in their current roles and are able to take on a slightly different remit. But I wouldn't hold any fears that this will have any negative impact or disruptive element around recruitment, because it is the same two effectively people driving the process, driving the strategy, who are just going to probably work even closer together now moving forward. I guess right now it is, and there was some lovely words in that personal statement that Neil Adams put out on the official channels earlier today, and I think he said it best, really. 30 years of service. Every time he's gone in the building, whatever role, he's always tried to give his absolute best as a player. Various roles in the academy, obviously then, first team coach, and then latterly more in the executive sort of football leadership role, assisting first Stuart Webber and now Ben Napper. And the warmth of Ben Napper's words would tell you, the impact that he has felt. That, and we talked about it with, as you said, with Kenny and continuity. Well, there's a strand that has ran through many different eras at this football club, and you need people like that who understand the DNA of what it is to be, connected to Norwich. And as he said in his personal statement, he will still very much remain like those fans he paid tribute to at the end, a Norwich fan. And I think it probably feels like it's good timing as well for me, because I think, they now, the Atanazios and Norfolk Holdings are firmly in control and have been now for coming up maybe 12 months in terms of the baton definitively being passed. They're just driving forward now. You get this sense that there's a momentum now, and Clement coming in is representative of that, and change in and around the club in terms of these positions. Now it's all designed to really accelerate the processes that they believe are going to be crucial around data primarily, to get this club not only back to the Premier League, but when they get there, can they then be sustainable in terms of the Premier League? And I think that pace of change, it just feels like it's starting to pick up again, in terms of the mid to longer term, because, quite clearly you don't go out and attract a head coach like Philippe Clement, if you're happy just to, well, okay, we'll tread water a little bit and hopefully it'll come together in time and then we'll get ourselves eventually out. I think there's an urgency to everything that's happening now behind the scenes at that football club, and certainly in the mid to longer term, I think they're making changes now around the football structure designed to basically future-proof Norwich to try and be a sustainable Premier League entity. And as Neil said, in his statement, he's a granddad of 3 now, I think he said, and he'd like to spend a bit more family time, with his nearest and dearest, and who would begrudge him that, given the length of service he's given to this football club. So, he will definitely go with everybody's best wishes. You cannot deny that he's always acted in the best interests of Norwich City. As a result, I think there will be plenty of people who will be very fond of him and continue to be so, and wish him all the best. But equally, if, as we expect, it is Lee Dunn stepping up, then let's see what that dynamic with Ben Napper, because obviously it's going to be slightly different, clearly, to the Ben Napper and Neil Adams coupling. So I'm kind of quite interested to see materially what that actually means in terms of unleashing, as I say, the next phase of this project for Norfolk Holdings. Yes,
you mentioned there about sort of the goal being getting back to the Premier League. We had news this week, of course, of the Championship playoff shake-up that the EFL have now introduced. Is going to be down to 8th place next season. It's going to be more like the National League format in terms of 8th and 7th place playing 5th and 6th, and then the winners of those ties going on to play the teams that finish 3rd and 4th, and then of course the winners from those will make the final at Wembley. There's been a lot of controversy. I think fans have had different opinions. I think majority probably feel it's a bad move. I think off the back of our post, there was a lot of people that disagreed with that move. Just intrigued maybe to get your take on that before we talk a little bit more about this FA Cup tie on Sunday.
Well, you tell me, where are you at with it, AH?
I wrote in the newsletter for the Pink and Plus subscribers earlier this week that I was very much against the move. I think as much as I can maybe understand the reasoning in terms of more competitive games towards the end of the season, more things on the line for different teams. It just feels to me like when something's not broke, then why try and fix it? And I think the playoffs, Norwich have been part of them for good and bad over recent times. The Wembley final of 2015 that no Norwich fan will ever forget, that was present at the stadium on that day. And we've obviously had the other side of it and the heartbreak at Elland Road a few years back, which I think most fans probably went into that game expecting to get beat because of the gulf between Norwich and Leeds. So I think you look at the gulf there, that was 3rd versus 6th. The gulf potentially between 3rd and 8th place could be absolutely huge. It could be 25, 30 odd points, if kind of certain scenarios or situations play out. So it almost feels a little bit unjust, I feel, that if a team finishes 8th in the Championship, that they can, get themselves promoted to the Premier League, and a team that finishes 3rd and might miss out by a point or a couple of points or even on goal difference, will not see themselves playing Premier League football the following season. So I think that's where my head's at with it. I don't know whether you agree or disagree.
Well, I mean, I more or less agree, because I just don't see it as a format. It's a brilliant format. It is jeopardy of the highest scale, isn't it? So why change the format? I just don't. The only thing I'm assuming it's the broadcasters, it's extra games, both in terms of the ones that will now matter if you broaden it out to potentially 8 teams. Well, that's going to suck in maybe top half of the division. Far more intriguing from a broadcasting perspective, and then you get to the post game, whatever label you want to attach to it. But the post game hijinks, then again, that's probably more games that broadcasters.
I think we might have lost Paddy there. I see a few people in the comments that probably feel similar. One here about not being keen on the change. If we fell one place short, then I'm sure I wouldn't mind. Seeing Norwich City take that place. Extra revenue. It does feel like a financial decision. It is definitely behind that. Of course, intrigued to get everybody else's thoughts and comments on that. So definitely get those down below, because it is a big move. I think it's the first time in quite a number of decades now that they've seen a change to the system and the format. Paddy's back. If you want to continue your thought there, I was just kind of talking about the comment there about extra revenue, Paddy.
Yeah. I don't know how much of that you could hear, but I don't know. I was going off on one about the broadcasters, so whether they've pulled the plug out of the connections down here in the dungeon, I don't know. But because that's the only I can see factor in why you're taking a format which has worked perfectly, the excitement, the jeopardy of it, and decided to quite structurally change it in a big. I mean, as I was saying, that'll probably suck in the top half of the division. If you look at the points differentials right now at this stage of the season, there's going to be a lot of clubs who are thinking, well, we could target eighth. And if that is the case, then that's probably more excitement from a broadcast point of view, and certainly post-game, post-season, this structure. Yeah, I think that's probably what it is. But so bar that, I don't see what the justification is for it. I mean, I think I worry then, where does it stop? Because I'm going way back in the mists of time, but there was, I think in the very early phase of the playoff system, there was at least one season I remember where the bottom or the third bottom team in the top flight, as it was, played one of the teams at the top end of the second division. It was almost like and you see that in Germany, I think they still have that, don't they? Where there's like a Bundesliga 2 playoff as well. Do we get to a point where they start sucking in teams who are just above the cut line in the Premier League, and then they get thrown into it? So, yeah, it's not a good development, I don't think, in terms of a format which was working perfectly, and they've decided to toy with it. But and it doesn't feel particularly well. It sits well with me in terms of the consultation. It feels that it's been a bit of a carve up between those who attend, representatives of these clubs who attend these EFL meetings. I don't think we know who voted for it, who voted for against it. What was the reasoning as to why clubs have decided that this makes sense? It'd be good if that could be actually communicated out to the fans, the people who matter, because I don't really see what the justification is other than the broadcasters have lent on the EFL and they've complied. So, but yeah, no, it's I don't know. Maybe if Norwich sneak in terms of 7th or 8th this time next season, then we might have a different view. But as you make a very good point there, the competitive element of the 8th place team playing a team who finished 3rd. I mean, I suppose anything can happen in a one-off game, but I don't think there's huge prospects of the teams finishing 7th and 8th, managing to go all the way in the playoff maze. So, it feels a bit gimmicky to me, yeah. And I don't think it improves the overall product, which was, in this regard, was perfect as it was. As you said rightly, who would forget those playoff tussles with Ipswich when it was full on perform or you're out kind of vibe, and then obviously the memorable, final trip to Wembley for the Middlesbrough game. So yeah, we'll see. But my fear is it doesn't stop there, and then they come up with ever new ways or to change the format, to tweak the format because they've decided that we need to keep the broadcast audiences continually engaged and excited and willing to part with whatever cost of packages are as we move forward. But yeah, it feels like it's a top-down imposed thing on a. To my mind, I've not seen any fans, Norwich or more broadly, who have embraced this. So what does that tell you? If there's almost universal kind of we don't like that, that would suggest that again, it's not the fans who are being put first in any of these decisions.
Yeah, we'll park that for now. We'll worry about that next season. Turning our attentions back to the FA Cup before I maybe put you on the spot for a prediction. Where do you see this game being won and lost, I guess, on Sunday? If you look at the two teams and their relative league status, then I think, as you said, outside the bubble, most people would have probably will expect Leeds to get the job done. But where can Norwich, I guess, sort of pin their hopes on trying to get a result and progress to the quarterfinals?
Well, I did watch Farke's post-match midweek after the Sunderland defeat, and he was actually bold a question about, okay, next is Norwich, and what type of game do you think that'll be? And he felt Norwich would maybe take a leaf out of Sunderland's book and try to be very compact and very resolute and sort of shape-wise out of possession, maybe a deep block. I'm not sure really, because don't think we've necessarily seen that under Clement. I mean, even Middlesbrough would be the best example, the most comparable one. They went there and they really tried to take it to Middlesbrough that day. The Riverside recently, yes, they fell the wrong side of the result, but little bit harshly for me on the balance of that game, but they were still very progressive. And if anything, they had lots of transitional moments and lots of counter-attacking promise. So kind of see where he's coming from, that, naturally you might think that Leeds would have more of the ball, more of the territory, more of the possession. They would be more of the instigator. But I don't think Norwich will go there and the mythical part of the bus. I can't see Clement going with that mindset. So yes, they will need to be resolute, clearly, but equally, I think they will, hopefully, particularly if players like Mahoma can get on the ball, Slimani, if he gets introduced into the mix, Ahmed, if there's plenty of space to work in, then we've seen it. We've seen it pretty much every week since the turn of the year, especially that this Norwich team carry a real threat. It's been quite a tight game, because also I think what plays into Norwich's favour is the expectancy, the weight on those Leeds players' shoulders that you should be beating this team, and they're coming off the back of the defeat. And plenty of times I've been in Elland Road, and if things aren't going well, that's a fan base who let you know if you're a Leeds player. So can Norwich tap into that kind of?
We seem to have lost Paddy again. It's the point there, Stan, that Clement, I think, it's going to be intriguing in terms of where it's won or lost. But I probably agree in terms of the fitness and availability point. Norwich are somewhat stretched. There's obviously intriguing selection decisions to be made. Matthias Chris-Goran is probably the obvious one, given he's the only fit and available natural forward for Norwich, particularly over the next kind of month or so in a busy period. I think it's 5 games in 13 days starting on Sunday, and clearly, he's a player that Norwich are going to require over that run, and he's the only option they have in that position. So he's someone that I think it's got to be managed and sort of looked at in terms of this game and his availability moving forwards. Obviously, the goalkeeper decision, Paddy did sort of touch on that at the start. Does he back Grimshaw, who's been pretty good in cup games so far? 2 goals conceded over those 2 games, but done enough to certainly warrant, I think, a place heading to Elland Road. Then obviously the defensive side of it as well is intriguing. With sort of Harry Darling, does he come back in with Jose Cordoba? Sort of been selected more in the Championship. Paddy is back. I just kind of went sort of into a little bit more about the point that I think Matt made in terms of fitness and sort of availability, and whether that could be a determining factor, I guess, on Sunday.
Yeah, somebody's saying we should put £1 in our broadband meter. I'm not sure that's going to make any difference down here. It's a bit of a funny one because we normally do broadcasts down here, but there you go. Let's hope this is the only thing that goes wrong around Norwich this weekend. That's what I'm going to say. Again, don't know how much of that you caught, but I was basically saying play on the expectancy, play on. I mean, Alan Smith we spoke to indirectly this week, well-known pundit, Arsenal FA Cup winner in his time as a player, and he said that he didn't say expectancy, he said more complacency, that maybe Leeds turn up thinking we'll get the job done, be it fans, be it players, be it staff. So maybe Norwich can play on that, that stay in the game, and then they just get nervous and there'll be a tension around there. And as I was saying, probably before I got cut off, plenty of time I've been in Elland Road where if the Leeds players aren't delivering, those fans are quick to tell them. So, all of those factors could work in Norwich's favour. But I still think the quality that they've got in their ranks, I think they'll probably just have an on the day. But I'm going 2-1 Leeds, mate. You?
Yeah, I fear that Norwich might just fall on the wrong side of it on Sunday. But it is, the cup and anything can happen. And we've seen bigger shocks over this tournament or this cup competition so far with Macclesfield, doing the job against Premier League Crystal Palace, and Palace started a relatively strong squad on that occasion. Obviously, the Elland Road atmosphere and sort of Norwich's record there hasn't been great over recent times, but I think under Clement anything's possible, and they'll certainly back themselves to try and go there and get on the front foot and sort of turn that Leeds crowd against their team early doors, and then almost try and use that as kind of motivation to get the job done over the course of the piece. But I think I'm with you. Could see a narrow 2-1 defeat, which I think in the grand scheme of things is not the end of the world. As much as Norwich fans would love a cup run that goes a little bit deeper into the competition. I think you look at some of the sides left in it. it doesn't feel very likely that whoever Norwich get in the quarterfinals, it could be a Manchester City, Chelsea, Arsenal type. As much as I think we'd all love to believe that they could probably go and beat them and reach Wembley for a semi-final, it does feel marginally unlikely. So, yeah, I think Championship is clearly the focus now between now and the end of the season. So survival is almost all but achieved, and I think then we can sort of start to look forward to the summer and hopefully more of a promotion push next season. So of course we'll be at Elland Road, so we'll have all of the team news and everything around the build-up of this game. We'll be down at the press conference, of course, tomorrow as well, speaking to Philippe Clement. Hopefully there's some good news on the fitness front, maybe a few more players available in the coming weeks. Norwich will need them with the amount of games they've got coming up. With all that, we're going to sign off this lunchtime. Thanks for joining us. Of course, thanks for putting up with our connection issues. We'll try and resolve those, of course, for the next one. And we will see you very soon.